It's 10 o'clock, so I'm going to go ahead and just, first of all, say welcome to everybody who's here. I'm not sure how many people are going to attend. I think it's going to be variable throughout the course of the day. It's all brand new technology for me, and I'm curious to see how it works and how it goes over. I wanted to thank the membership, first of all, for supporting the association. I would like to thank the USS Midway for hosting us. I think they're being extremely generous with their facilities and with their talent and expertise, and we're very lucky that we've been able to enter into a partnership with USS Midway. I'd also like to thank the presenters, the people who are giving up their time and doing this to share their knowledge and share their experience in naval history. You know, the whole purpose of this group, the Western Naval Historical Association, was to give a venue or a voice to people who like naval history for whatever reason, but they don't find the means of satisfying their fondness for the discipline. We're trying to encompass everybody who's interested, and we're trying to give a voice to people who live on the West Coast, because living out here, you know that if you're interested in naval history and you want to attend any events, you have to go to DC, you have to go to Annapolis, and you have to go to Newport. And after that, your choices are Annapolis, Newport, and DC. So having things happen here in San Diego, and hopefully in the future we'll be able to do some events in the Bay Area or in the Los Angeles area. It'd be nice to be able to do something from USS Iowa, for example. But that's all in the future. You know, things have changed an awful lot since our last symposium in 2020. But it's still been a pretty good year for the Western Naval Historical Association, I think. We've started a series of Q&As, which are basically just one presentation given on a Saturday, and those have been very popular. I'm kind of flabbergasted, or maybe I shouldn't be flabbergasted. I'm very pleased to see that John Parshall's recording, for example, has gotten 10,000 hits, and we're well over 1,000 hits in our second one about the battleships. And these will continue, and I think it makes a really good, not product, but a really good service that the association can provide to its members. And I think the opportunity of just gathering together and asking questions of distinguished historians is really kind of a unique opportunity, and it's one that people have been able to take advantage of, and it's been good for everybody, I think. The other things I wanted to say about our association is that, you know, we're trying to include everybody, and I think you're going to see that the program today reflects that. We're looking to include people who are interested in naval history, but that they could be veterans, they could be enthusiasts, they could be scholars, they could be writers, they could be just people who like to play games, like to make models. There's all sorts of people who come to this for all sorts of different reasons. And one of the things that I think surprises people sometimes is the depth of knowledge that exists in groups and in individuals who approach naval history from a different attitude or from a different point of view. I know that if you want technical information, naval wargamers are the people to go to. They know the details like nobody else, because that's really important to what they do. All the veterans have their stories, their experiences. The writers are always approaching this from different points of view. So I think we've been very successful in what I envisioned as being the association's mission, which was to bring more people into this, to give us more opportunities to practice the disciplines that we like, and to give us more opportunity to meet people, to share experiences, to share resources, to overall just make this a better discipline, a more active discipline, and to give everybody who wants to participate, you know, an opportunity to participate on one level or the other. So, having said all that, I'm not gonna talk for a great period of time here. I wanted to go ahead and turn it over to Karl Zingheim. Karl has been coordinating this entire event. He's the Director of History. He's the ship historian for USS Midway. He's a professor at San Diego State University. I've known Karl for, I don't know how long I've known Karl, a long time. He's been a great friend. Karl is an excellent writer. He's a complete package, and I'm really happy that he's going to be able to host our event today. So I'll stop talking, and Karl, it's all up to you now. Thank you.
Thank you, Vince. Welcome, everyone, to the third annual Western Naval Historical Association Symposium, coordinated live from the decks of the USS Midway Museum in San Diego. I will be your host this weekend, Karl Zingheim, staff historian for the USS Midway Museum, and I also serve as an adjunct professor at San Diego State University. Working with me in the crucial role of technical coordination is our own Trevor Humphrey, who is from the USS Midway Institute for Teachers. This weekend, you're going to see a wide variety of presentations that best exemplify what the WNHA is all about. For the benefit of those who are just joining us or new to what WNHA is about, we are an association of people who share a passion for naval history in all its forms. We come from different walks of life, and we choose to express our passion for naval history in different ways, as you will certainly see with this weekend's presentations. We welcome your interest and hope that you'll be able to have an idea of joining our organization, and we certainly welcome your attention to our proceedings, as well as finding more information about the association by visiting the website at www.wnha.net. We're going to commence our symposium this weekend with an address from noted author James Hornfischer. He is a career literary agent who, a number of years ago, decided to take his hand at exploring naval history and was able to debut his work, The Last Stand of the Tin Can Sailors, to wide critical and popular acclaim. This work on the actions of the destroyer screen for Taffy 3 at the Battle of Samar during the Leyte Gulf action was followed by other works covering U.S. naval operations in the Pacific War and World War II. Among these were Neptune's Inferno and The Fleet at Last Tide. Currently, Mr. Hornfischer is devoting himself to exploring the hitherto underrepresented history of the U.S. Navy in the Cold War. And with that, I would like to hand things over to Mr. Hornfischer.
I'm delighted to be part of this event. Thank you to Vince O'Hara and to Karl and to Sam Tangretti for arranging for my presence here. I'm very proud of this venue. The USS Midway is close to my heart. I've been on board many times. Very gratifying visits, all of them. Most recently, to see the Top Gun exhibit on board in the company of the officer who founded Top Gun, Dan Pedersen, and I was fortunate to work with Dan on a very fine memoir, which he published last March 2019, that is. I commend it to all of you to read. It's a very good personal account of the state of naval aviation circa the Vietnam War era in 1969, and how Top Gun was called upon to fix the problem of our sudden deficiency in dogfighting, and how Dan and other instructors who recruited to Top Gun remedied the problem of using the F-4 Phantom in air-to-air combat, and they achieved notable successes. So there's a very fine exhibit on board the ship there. Afterward, I'd recommend you ask somebody where it is and go check it out. So when I finished The Fleet at Flood Tide, I was in the position of having reached the end of the Pacific War, both atomic bombs having been dropped, Emperor Hirohito having been thereby compelled very reluctantly to surrender and accept the Potsdam Declaration, accepting unconditional surrender and consenting to occupation by U.S. forces, with General MacArthur in the role of Supreme Commander Allied Powers, superior to the Emperor and administering the occupation of the home islands. As a writer and a researcher, having covered this story, I found that I was not able to go back in time and cover some previous battle or campaign. I felt compelled to move forward and to follow my nose with major events going forward, beginning with the very surprising developments in Washington that confront the Navy immediately post-war. You would think, having achieved the status of a colossus astride the earth, the Navy would have been welcomed with open arms in the Pentagon and its roles and missions ratified and confirmed, but it was very much the opposite. My book opens with Admiral Halsey arriving in New York City, which is blanketed in snow, in December of 1945 for the ticker tape parade in the Canyon of Heroes, and also to give a major address at the Waldorf Astoria Hotel, protesting the Truman administration's drive to unify all the military services as a single unified department. This so-called defense unification, it was thought, would have saved, this according to General Eisenhower, would have saved the U.S. 25% on the cost of defeating the Axis in World War II. These numbers were very specious, and the Navy sets about to defend its role in the firmament of American defense, contending against Army and Air Force leadership, saying that, well, thank you, carrier task groups and Marine regiments are very useful things, but now that we have the ability to drop atomic bombs on our enemies flying over oceans and dropping these terrible new weapons on our foes, we no longer really need a Navy, forgetting the fact that it was only the Navy that achieved the conquest of these air bases that the Army needed to use the B-29s against Japan, and forgetting a great number of important lessons, which were outlined by Admiral Nimitz himself very eloquently. What is sea power? America as a maritime nation would rise and fall with its proficiency in the business of asserting naval power worldwide. And Nimitz was a very articulate proponent of this proposition. Speaking to the National Geographic Society, he argues that sea power has its roots deep in the core of our country.
There we go.
He says the roots of sea power derive from our mines, our logging camps, our mills and factories. There is scarcely a village in the center of the continent which does not contribute in some way to America's sea power. The dynamic was easily seen in Navy towns like New York, Norfolk, San Diego, and Bremerton, Washington. It inherited the work of farmers in Iowa, scientists in labs from Berkeley to Woods Hole, of hydraulic press operators squeezing hot steel ingots in Allentown, and of managers drawing up shipbuilding contracts in Washington, and in the union halls whose labor fulfilled them. Alfred Thayer Mahan, too, had argued that sea power was linked holistically to U.S. national life. As Nimitz would put it, modern war is total. No nation can wage successful war which fails to utilize its industrial capacity to the fullest extent. It is not enough to have a great industrial plant. That plant must be mobilized, supplied, and made an integral part of the war machine. Now, the National Geographic people were so impressed by Nimitz's case that they gave him an article in the June 1946 of National Geographic magazine titled, "Your Navy, America's Peace Insurance." Peace insurance, indeed. Deterrence and peace through strength. It was only after U.S. politicians articulated our defense perimeter as excluding the Korean peninsula that North Korea and the Soviet Union were emboldened to begin an offensive to conquer South Korea in June of 1950. And this leads to calamity. This leads to the U.S. squaring off against a Chinese army, 1 million men strong. Yes, 7 figures, 1 million men. They end up being targets in an impressive live fire exercise that involves carrier, close support aircraft, Marine air groups as well, artillery, and naval bombardment. And so the Korean War is an impressive demonstration of the various dimensions of naval power, from the Incheon landings, which demonstrate the power of amphibious operations, to naval close air support, which saves the first Marine Division at Chosin Reservoir, and the evacuation forces, which pull them out of the port of Wonsan. That evacuation was a very impressive military exercise on par with Dunkirk. And it's also a humanitarian exercise, saving a great many South Koreans from the grips of the communists. And this is the theme of my new book, demonstrating how the Navy conducts its business throughout the early years of the Cold War. Who Can Hold the Sea is the title of the book, The U.S. Navy in the Cold War, 1945 to 1960. I'm completing it right now. It will be published in the spring of 2022 by Bantam. And I should also mention I'm working on something else that I consider is a pretty cool project. It's a graphic, thanks to the Naval Institute in Annapolis, they're doing a graphic novel version of The Last Stand of the Tin Can Sailors. Which is a nifty little thing. It's the whole, Naval Institute's Dead Reckoning Press is their graphic novel imprint, and they're determined to expand the reach of naval history into younger audiences by using the appeal of the graphic novel format. And I tell you, it's spectacular. It's a spectacular rendering of the story, and we've come up with some minor revelations along the way. Jonathan Parshall talked about the mythos of certain naval battles, namely Midway. He talked about Mitsuo Fuchida and the mythos of the flight decks of the Japanese carriers during the dive bomber attack. Well, there's a considerable mythos surrounding the battle off Samar as well. Namely, the idea that the USS Johnston turned around and followed the other destroyers and DEs in on their torpedo runs, with Captain Evans famously saying, "We can lend gunfire support." Well, come to find out, thanks to a very good oral history that Captain Robert Hagen gave to the Nimitz Museum 2 months before his death, come to find out that Evans was compelled to belay the order to follow the DDs and DEs on their torpedo attack. The Johnston, of course, was running on one engine, manual steering, and had expended all of her torpedoes. And I guess he concluded that he really would not be able to bob and weave, chase shell splashes, and avoid being destroyed in a hurry, as Johnston eventually was. But he belayed the order to go on this gun run following the torpedo attack of the other DEs and DDs, and carried out a 360-degree turn and returned to station, making smoke alongside the carriers as part of the screen. And so this puts to bed the myth that the Johnston, performed this impressive and dangerous maneuver under considerable fire, and hopefully will underscore the gallantry of the ship nonetheless. There's no diminishment of courage implied by the fact that we're correcting the record in this regard. But I was impressed by the candor of Captain Hagen, whom I met, who passed away in 2007. But he gives this incredible oral history to the National Museum of the Pacific War in Texas, 2 months before his death, and he opens up about this belaying of the order to follow the other ships in on their torpedo runs. So we do away with this mythos, I guess, or at least correct the record to an important extent. And that graphic novel will come out in October of this year. It's beautifully drawn up by the artists and illustrators at the Naval Institute. And I'm going to be exploring sending more naval history to the graphic novel people at the Naval Institute. They do a very fine job. It's a really cool project. The other thing I'm working on is a biography of Ernest Evans, captain of the Johnston, with my son, David Hornfischer, as my co-author. We're doing this as part of a new military heroes series for Penguin. And this will be published, I suppose, also in the spring of 2022, perhaps just ahead of my Cold War history. But meanwhile, my major project is, as I say, this Cold War volume, which covers 1945 to 1960. It covers, therefore, the entirety of the Korean War. It covers a number of other important subjects, namely this idea, we've got the Navy under fire in this roles and missions argument, and they're about to be run out of existence by an Air Force which carries the conceit that the Navy is no longer essential. So the roles and missions argument carries forward, and the first thing the Navy comes up with is like, okay, let's carry out a demonstration. Let's gather up some surplus, old ships from the reserve and some captive German and Japanese warships, take them out to an atoll in the Pacific and drop a couple of Fat Men on them. See what happens. Well, they drop one, a B-29 flown by none other than Colonel Paul Tibbets, drops the first test bomb. I believe the target ship was Nevada, painted a bright orange color to emphasize her as visually as the target. And Tibbets manages to miss her by half a mile. The bomb is nonetheless impressive. Even more impressive is the underwater blast, which is carried out half a day later. There's some spectacular photography showing the effect of the underwater blast. The battleship Arkansas being lifted out of the sea and dropped back down. Oh, the target fleet includes the carrier Saratoga, the battleship Arkansas, battleship Nagato, the captured from Yokohama, the German cruiser Prince Eugen, as well as a variety of Japanese cruisers and other vessels. The effects of the blast are impressive, but they demonstrate that a fleet of warships can withstand the shock and the heat of an atomic blast. What is shocking, though, is the lingering effects of atomic radiation. The ships are significantly irradiated by seawater and fallout and are indeed uninhabitable. And so in the debriefing carried out by Admiral Blandy's team, we discovered that atomic bombs do not wipe a fleet from the face of the sea, but the fallout effects will render these ships useless and indeed uninhabitable going forward. So there commences an effort to kind of render our ships more survivable, and a vast number of ships are put into the reserve fleet. And we carry forward into the Cold War with an active fleet of about 300 ships and a reserve fleet about 3 times that size. And many of these ships will be reactivated for service in Korea and Vietnam, including all 4 Iowa-class battleships, a great many heavy cruisers of the Baltimore class, and light cruisers of the Cleveland class will be outfitted with these new missiles that are being developed. Talos, Terrier, and Tartar are very effective, but they are very difficult to operate at sea, to store and to deploy and to fire at sea, but they nonetheless promise they herald a revolution. So naval weaponry undergoes a revolution in the early Cold War, and we see Sidewinder missile being developed, a very effective missile being very, very cheaply developed at China Lake and put into use by Taiwanese fighters against Chinese MiGs. The score of their first engagement during one of the Taiwan Straits crises is very quickly 5-0, foretelling our clash with Libya in 1986. Well-flown, missile-equipped fighter planes equipped with infrared homing missiles such as Sidewinder will run rings around gun-equipped rivals. At the same time, old-fashioned surface ships such as heavy cruisers and battleships will become very valuable when you can fix enemy troop concentrations, as the Chinese allow us to do in the following their intervention in Korea in 1950 and 51. It's a very near-run thing, the experience of the 1st Marine Division at Chosin Reservoir, but they were able to beat feet back to one side there to be evacuated by Admiral Doyle's amphibious fleet. It's a very impressive exercise. It would not have been possible at all but for the very active work of the close air support missions flown by the 1st Marine Air Wing and the carriers of Task Force 77. So the argument about the battleship and the aircraft carrier is by no means solved by the Korean War. There are arguments going both ways, I suppose, as they will. And so Truman's effort to slash the Navy, to slash the Pentagon's budget, is paid by all services. He's determined to spend no more than $14.4 billion in 1950, 51, 52. And Truman has his way, while at the same time saddling the Navy with being at the point of the spear of the containment of the Soviet Union. George Kennan, the number 2 in the State Department in Moscow station, writes a famous memo back to his office in Foggy Bottom, pointing out the nature of the Soviet threat. And what Kennan does is articulate the extent of communist Soviet ambitions worldwide, articulated by Stalin himself in a January 1946 speech on the occasion of the elections which are taking place. And elections in communist Soviet Union are kind of a joke. You know who's going to win. It's the communist candidate supported by Stalin. But his speech is a great service in that it articulates the ambitions of worldwide communism led by the Soviet Union. And George Kennan is listening closely and issues a long memo back to the State Department, which is then adapted as an article. The so-called X article is published anonymously, but its authorship was unmistakable to those who knew Kennan's vigorous prose style and his voice. It's an impressive articulation of what U.S. policy should be in response to the Soviet worldwide threat. It has a very powerful effect in the Truman administration. Seeing to it that article reaches the desk of every admiral in OPNAV is not just Kennan, but his biggest proponent, James Forrestal, the first defense secretary. So Forrestal plays a major role in bringing Kennan's thinking across official Washington. And Truman articulates a containment policy, which according to Kennan, consists of unalterable counterforce asserted against anywhere the Soviet Union seeks to turn a neutral government communist or undermines a democratically elected government. And so this becomes the policy of the Truman administration and is carried forward containment as the more or less official foreign policy of the U.S. under really every president, not much altered from Truman forward. And so this requires a very robust naval power to carry out, because how else are you going to oppose communist aggression in Korea or Vietnam? At the height of the travails of the French in Indochina, Dien Bien Phu being their Alamo, there was a naval exercise underway which was designed to carry out atomic strikes against communist soldiery in Indochina. Admiral Stump's Pacific Fleet was going to carry it out using the atomic equipped carriers Essex and what were the other ones, I believe? There's an appalling story is laid out in a very good book called Operation Vulture. That was the code name for this atomic strike operation, which much to Eisenhower's credit, he says, "Are you kidding? We're going to bomb Oriental peoples again, twice in a decade? Y'all have got to be crazy." So Eisenhower puts the kibosh on this plan, and it's not carried out. And the French are sent packing with their tail between their legs following the defeat of Dien Bien Phu. Of course, the victory of the communists in Indochina foretells the Vietnam War, foretells further communist aggressions in Cambodia and elsewhere in Southeast Asia. So in volume 2, I'll have to cover the entirety of the Vietnam War. Big gulp. There are some good sources there, of course, but the role of the Navy will be that of naval aviation flown from Yankee Station. And we've got PACOM Commander U.S. Grant Sharpback at Pearl Harbor, who's appalled by the politicization of the war. He'll be a major point of view character, as will be a great number of admirals who have given oral histories to the Naval Institute. I commend to you this series of oral histories. Also at Columbia, the Columbia Oral History Collection, Columbia University in New York, as well as the Naval Institute's collection, is a priceless resource, a first-person witness to major events of the early Cold War. These are expertly drawn-out naval histories, hat tip to the staff of the Naval War College, as well as the Naval Institute, for executing these beautifully done oral histories. These transcripts are 200 pages plus in most cases, and they're full of detail and full of personal observations and revelations, large and small, about the events that are covered. So I'll draw deeply on these resources to, as I have in Volume 1, to carry out Volumes 2 and 3. But who can hold the sea is not a question. It derives from the observation of Themistocles, the great Athenian admiral, who said, "Whosoever controls the sea has command of everything." So who can hold the sea refers to the United States. Who can hold the sea? Who has blue water naval power? Who can assert sea control and then use that sea control to carry out power projection against land powers? The Korean War is a test case, as is Vietnam, as are the repeated crises in the Taiwan Straits, as Mao Zedong licks his chops looking across the Taiwan Straits at his favorite, his target of Taiwan and Chiang Kai-shek's nationalists. Mao would love nothing more than to crush them, but through a major amphibious invasion. But his ambitions are thwarted by the U.S. Navy on several occasions, maintaining the Taiwan Straits Patrol under Admiral Roland Smoot. And that, too, is an important demonstration of the deterrent power of naval strength. So these issues are put forward, I hope compellingly, not in the context of total war, as I did in Fleet of Flood Tide, but in the context of deterrence and communist aggression worldwide. Likewise, useful as a case study is the Suez Canal crisis in 1956, when Egyptian President Nasser decides to seize the canal. The British and the Israelis don't take too kindly to this, nor do the French, and they respond militarily. With 200 British ships respond, including the entirety almost of their carrier strength. The French and the British drop paratroopers into the Sinai to take control of the canal. And it's the first of many ignominious defeats that Arab powers will face in the face of Israeli and Allied strength. Fascinating history, all of it highlighting the essential importance of naval power. Combat credible forward presence is the coin of the realm. So our numbered fleets carry this load, the 6th Fleet in the Mediterranean and the 7th Fleet in the Pacific. It was critical to maintain both these numbered fleets in kind of combat-ready status, with carriers and cruisers and transports and marine battalions at the ready to deter and oppose enemy aggression. So the Cold War flares hot, as Jeffrey Barlow effectively reminds us in his wonderful book, Cold War Turned Hot. I recommend that book to all of you as well, as an important starting point on the subject. So this 15-year period is ripe with lessons and case studies and set pieces of combat and prospective combat, which add up to a strong argument in favor of maintaining a very strong forward deployed combat credible fleet. As the book begins with the Navy being threatened by nuclear weapons, its relevance and its roles and missions very much at issue as the Army argues that we don't need a separate Naval Air Force and we don't need a Marine Corps. They actually say that there's nothing that a naval pilot does that cannot be performed by an Army pilot. And I guess we'll leave it to the imagination how well Army dive bombers would have fared at the Battle of Midway. And so this existential crisis besets the Navy immediately following World War II in the context of this defense unification argument. And it finally turns around, and the Navy secures its place at the table by developing what? A nuclear strike capability of its own. I'm talking about the Polaris missile system, brilliantly developed by Admiral Red Rayborn in the Department of Special Projects. Arleigh Burke oversees this and supports him to the fullest. As Chief of Naval Operations, Admiral Burke is a pivotally important figure in the early Cold War. He serves 6 years as Chief of Naval Operations, overseeing the development of Polaris, which once and for all cements the place of the Navy in the nuclear triad. Right? We have B-52 bombers, we have Minuteman ICBM missiles, and now we have the Boomer submarine fleet. 41 for freedom is what Eisenhower calls it, and we build 41 of these beautiful Boomer submarines, each of them equipped with 16 Polaris missiles. And the perfection of the Polaris missile is where this story ends. When the USS George Washington goes to sea and demonstrates the efficacy of the Polaris missile system off Cape Canaveral for the benefit of President Eisenhower and every general in the Pentagon, the Navy can say, once and for all, we are required for the defense of the United States. It's only the Polaris submarine that can provide a nuclear missile launching capability that cannot be snuffed out preemptively by an enemy. And so where we begin, the Navy under threat of the atomic bomb, it is finally ironically the atomic bomb which assures the Navy's survival as an institution within the Pentagon in this hierarchy of the services. And so Polaris is immensely important. It's finally Polaris, this is unappreciated, but Polaris, the existence of Polaris gives President Kennedy the flexibility he needs to make a deal with Khrushchev to pull missiles out of Cuba. Kennedy realizes he doesn't need our missiles stationed in Turkey if he has Polaris. Polaris is the intermediate range missile system that will supplant our Pershing missiles in Turkey. Kennedy uses that flexibility to cut a deal with Khrushchev to pull the missiles out of Turkey. And Khrushchev responds by removing Soviet missiles from Cuba, immediately diffusing that very alarming act of brinksmanship on the part of both leaders. So Polaris becomes strategically important in a number of ways that are shown in the Cold War. And I'll be narrating this in the first volume, Who Can Hold the Sea, to be published in the spring of 2022. And I can't wait for you all to read it. So it's been very rewarding to leave World War II behind for the time being and tackle a new historical period. I believe that I've just about exhausted my time as a speaker, so if you have any questions, I'd love to hear them.
Thank you, Jim. We do have a question already from Professor Heinrich, who asks via the chat box, and everyone else, of course, is invited to utilize the chat box to send questions or commentary to us. And Professor Heinrich asks, here's a question: how serious, in your estimate, was the Soviet anti-sea lanes of communication threat in the North Atlantic during the 1950s?
During the 1950s?
Yes.
I think the threat of the backfire, and they're really capable standoff weapon-equipped bombers doesn't emerge until a little bit later, perhaps the 70s. But the Soviet backfire regiments really did acquire the capability to overwhelm our fleet. And I will be illuminating this, I think, vividly in volume 3 of my series. I had the opportunity of interviewing one of Admiral Ace Lyons' operations officers, who pointed out that they could have overwhelmed us with these standoff cruise missiles simply by putting an overwhelming number of missiles in the air inbound toward the fleet. It put a crushing burden upon the ability of the fleet to defend itself. And so dispersion and stealth really becomes critically important, as well as the outer air battle, using the F-14 fighter in this together with the E-2 Hawkeye to extend the combat air patrol, the reach of our combat air patrols around the fleet.
Yes, Professor Heinrich also suggests that his own sense was that the anti-SLOC threat was exaggerated in the 1950s, and that the submarine threat that the Soviets posed helped the U.S. Navy justify its demands for all its ASW expansion in the 1950s.
Yes, well, the concern about the Soviet submarine threat was immediately followed World War II, when there was this competition to take German technology and use it for our own purposes. The Soviets got a hold of these Type 21 submarines, which were state-of-the-art U-boats maintained by the Germans, and put them immediately into operation, stole their technology to improve. The Soviet design bureaus capitalized on the opportunity to reverse engineer these state-of-the-art German submarines. And so there was a very serious fear of, these Soviet diesel subs. And they very quickly followed the development of nuclear propulsion, putting their own classes of SSBNs to sea in the late 40s and early 50s. The ability to detect these submarines and to acquire an acoustic advantage, to use passive acoustic detection, and to maintain an acoustic advantage through the use of very refined manufacturing techniques and improved tolerances in machinery to reduce the amount of noise that your pumps and different systems emit into the water as you're cruising along in your SSN. And so the battle of acoustics is kind of won by the U.S. We maintained an acoustic advantage over the Soviets for a great many years, which allowed us to detect them before they could detect us, and to kill them prohibitively and preemptively if we had to. The Soviets attempt to hide their boomers under the Arctic ice pack in the so-called bastions. And it's finally our ability of our SSNs to cruise under the ice using passive sonar to detect enemy submarines that persuades the Soviets that their strategy won't work. And so this chess match is critically important. The ASW game, just as we had to use CVEs and TBMs to beat the U-boat threat in the Atlantic during World War II, we have to develop a refined capability to detect Soviet boomers and trail them under the ice to convince the Soviets that they will not have any kind of responsive nuclear strike capability if push comes to shove and worse comes to worse. And this is a concerted effort on the part of the U.S. Navy. ASW is a top priority. Arleigh Burke said, really, that's our first order of business and nothing else. ASW is. And so we roll out classes of SSNs equipped with passive sonar. And we also, detecting, cataloging the tonals of Soviet submarines, their acoustic signatures defined by their propeller noise, their pumps. Every little system inside the hull that makes noise is an Achilles heel. And we perfect this capability. And it's critically important in the Cold War.
Okay, I've got a question from Randy Stone, who Just wants to confirm if it was actually Tibbets who dropped the bomb in the test Able version of the bikini test.
He did. He flew a B-29 named Dave's Dream. And test Able is a Fat Man type device. He misses ground zero, target ground zero by about a half mile, unfortunately. And provoking some generals to say, we're never going to hear the end of this, damn it.
Okay. And Anthony Tully asks, if you had a situation that parallels what has gone awry with the Zumwalt littoral plans back then, in other words, was there a Cold War version of the littoral control ship and a misreading of what kind of vessel would need?
Yeah, well, I think we enjoyed some considerable success with our when they came from the Spruance hull design, it was a very successful innovation that led to another number of successful destroyer classes and cruiser classes as well. The Spruance hull is heralded in naval architecture as one of the great innovations, very durable and replicable and useful. And so we have, the Admiral Rickover perfects nuclear propulsion, and the surface fleet exploits this by launching the Long Beach cruiser and the Nimitz-class aircraft carrier, and we have nuclear-powered surface ships as well as submarines. The submarine fleet enjoys nuclear propulsion most because it allows them to remain underwater for tremendous periods. USS Triton exhibits the value of nuclear propulsion by circumnavigating the Earth underwater. And the Nautilus in 1948 finds a route from the Pacific to the Atlantic via the North Pole undersea, at considerable danger to her crew, contending with the great ice keels of the Sea of Okhotsk and the Bering Sea off Alaska. But they inch their way using navigation sonars to considerable effect, navigating under the pole, reaching the North Pole, and arriving in the North Atlantic. A real demonstration of the value of nuclear propulsion. And so the Nautilus and her fellow albacore nuclear-propelled SSNs are so successful. It's such a successful class of ship as to revolutionize naval warfare. So no, I can't point to any debacle on the scale of the LCS or the F-35 for that matter.
Jim, we have a question about historiography. You mentioned in your address that you were happy to shift from World War II into Cold War research subjects, but considering how well documented World War II was, could you give us an appreciation for what the landscape is for researching Cold War naval affairs?
Well, if you're looking for archival sources, I'm sorry to report that the situation is quite grim. I was spoiled in my work on World War II by the fact that everything up at NARA pertaining to World War II has long been declassified and is readily available for duplication. When you go in there and get your hand truck full of file folders and boxes, you can go through those things and just loot the hell out of the place for these valuable documents. I should say invaluable. When you go to the finding aids on the Cold War, you find, maybe 75% of the material is still under some type of classification. And your only remedy is to make a mandatory classification review request, which they're staffed to carry out that MDA to some limited effect on demand locally. But the problem is with COVID, you can't get in to even begin looking. So I was sort of hamstrung by the fact that the archival record was sealed up at National Archives. It's going to take some concerted effort to pry loose a lot of important documents in the hands of the censors, and I'll hope to perform some work in that regard in my future trips to NARA. Fortunately, though, we have a wonderful photo archive. Naval History and Heritage Command has a very large photo archive online, and all that Navy photography is public domain, so you're free to use their photographs in your books. but the problem is that of archival records. They're absolutely paranoid within the Navy Department that anything pertaining to cryptography or nuclear weapons up there that is of a classified nature is still on the loose in the archives, and that it will be pulled loose and made available to our enemies, I guess, thereby shortening their path to the acquisition of nuclear weapons. So there's a great sensitivity, I think, especially with regard to cryptography, nuclear weapons, which has caused NARA to be very gun shy about inquiring researchers visiting and looking to replicate records. So we're all going to have to make use of FOIA to the degree possible, but through the use of the so-called MDA, the MDR, the Mandatory Declassification Review. The archives are by law required to review documents for declassification after a certain period of years. And I can't summarize the law very succinctly, but there is a device available on site at NARA 2 in College Park, Maryland, to declassify records on request. And it will be incumbent upon anybody who practices naval history to make use of these tools to pry loose these important documents from the grips of the censors.
Okay. Thank you very much, Jim. And we really appreciate your remarks. And from all of us, we thank you for your time and hope that you'll be able to enjoy the rest of the symposium.